Hi, and welcome to Mr. Wilson Teaches Block Letter Sculpture. Today I'm going to bring you through the process of how to create a block letter. So this is one that a student made last marking period. So I'm going to bring you through all the steps to create this on your own. It's very easy. It's tons of stuff that you can find right at home and mix up to create it. So you will need some cardboard, and this is bought newsboard, but you can also just use boxes from like a cereal box or something at home. It's just really thin. You don't need to have anything corrugated, just some regular, heavy cardstock. You're also going to need some strips that are pre-cut. So I cut these to 2 inches. You can do any size you want, but that's usually a pretty good size for the depth, 2 inches. You're going to need some rulers. So this is going to help us both not only make the pre-cut slices, but you're going to use this to create the letter. You need scissors, masking tape. The masking tape I'm using is about 1 inch. But you can use whatever size you like. 1 inch just seems to work pretty well. You're going to need wheat paste. So this is some pre-mixed wheat paste, which I'll show you how to do in the video. If you don't have access to wheat paste, which you can easily buy online, you can make your own using flour and water and a little bit of Elmer's glue. So you can mix all that up. Same thing. You're also going to need a brush. This is the size brush I'm going to be using, but you can use whatever you have accessible to you. You need some paper towels that you can shred up, as well as some newspaper for the stuffing. And once we get later on in the video, we'll pull out some paint too, and I'll show you that part of the process, and we'll do some splatter paint and show you the differences and how to do that. So I'm going to cut you closer. We're going to start by talking about how to make the letter, and I'll take you from there. Okay, so the first step in this process is making 2 identical letters. So this sheet has already been cut to 9 by 12. So you can size it however you like. That's just what I decided to go with. And we're going to be making the letter N for Norwich today. So I'm going to start by doing everything 2 rulers length wide. You can do whatever measurement you want. I just think this is a lot easier than having to measure out every single aspect of it. So I know for the letter N, I'm going back and forth, so I need my 2 sides. And then I want this to connect from there. And I also want it to connect to this point on the bottom there. Going through, making that line so I can get the letter. And then obviously you would not want to cut on this line as well as that one. So there's our letter N. That's a fairly simple letter. Some of them can get pretty difficult, especially if there's cutouts. So each of those you'll have to decide how you want to do. It is easier to do block letters rather than curved edges. So curved is a little more advanced, but that'd be up to you if you can handle that. For this one, I'm just going to use scissors to cut out. You could potentially use a razor. So if you had some weird angles to get into, or let's say you have the inside like the letter A, then you would want to be using a razor so that you can get into there. Alright, so I'm going through and cutting out. Then these extra pieces I would toss. I'm not going to be using these. And then once you get one down, you're going to place it on top of the other, and we're going to trace it. So the reason we're tracing this rather than redrawing it in with the rulers is we want them to be identical because we need a top and a bottom of this. And if we don't trace it, then we're going to end up having 2 different ones or slightly off. Then I would cut this one out, and then I'll move you right into the next step. So you're going to have those 2 cut pieces, and there's step 1. Okay, so now that we have our letter cut out, the next step in this whole process is making the raised bed. So we need this to be like a coffin, so we need all these edges to come up. Some of them will be fairly easy depending on how well you measured everything out. So because I cut my 2 inch strips out of the same sheet, that should be sized the exact same way. So if you look, it should go edge to edge. I'm putting these underneath the shape and then moving up. So I've actually taped on both sides so they can pop right up. So there's one side done. Now as you start to go around the object, obviously this one's going to need to be cut. So I start by putting a small mark for how tall it goes. Then I'm going to cut that straight across. And that'll be my next piece to cut. Oh, sorry, to tape. I'm going to lift this up, apply the tape, and then as you go around, you can start taping these pieces together so that it stands up on its own. Now I'll do the inside. So this one is a little confusing because a lot of people's first reaction is to cut at the same angle. So I've seen people cut the exact same angle, and then when it goes up, you're going to be missing that piece. It's important when you measure, just make a little mark, take it completely off, and then cut right across. If you try to do any tricky stuff on the table, it's just going to make it more difficult. And I would tape that one in and start working my way on. So I'm going to do that separately. I'm going to show you the next step once all the sides are up there, but that's the process for adding the walls. Okay, so I've just finished creating all those 2-inch walls. The next step after this is to then flip it over, and we're going to seal all the edges. So all these edges you want to be completely covered, and there may be some gaps depending on how well the job you did, and that's okay. Masking tape will fix all those problems. I'm going to go through and just make sure that every single side gets it, so when you go stuff that paper, nothing ends up popping out at all. I'm going to take some time to do this to each of the edges. It's also important that you do all the sides too. So everywhere in here gets it just the same as the top, so that every single gap in each area is taken care of. I'm going to jump you ahead to the next step. Okay, now that all the sides have been taped, everything's sealed up, and I can now start the stuffing process. So for that, we're going to take newspaper. I'm going to be taking small little pieces of it and ripping it up and start putting it inside. So you want this to be pretty well stuffed so that when you go to add on the wheat paste, because that has water in it, it's going to warp the cardboard well. We need something to make sure this holds its shape and keeps it strong. And it will pop out, which can get a little frustrating, but we'll stuff all that back in so you don't have to worry about it. Alright, so that should be enough paper to do it, and then hopefully our lid fits correctly on here. And when you first lay it on, it's going to look like it didn't work because we've now stuffed it, but we're going to be taping and squeezing it together as we go. I'm going to start by lining it up on just one of the legs. I'm just going to squeeze it into place. And then as you work your way up, we're just going to keep squeezing it until it's all tight and put together. So I'm going to fast forward to that part. So just keep stuffing it in, working your way around. Alright, so as you can see, I did end up with some gaps, which, you know, is sort of inevitable as you do this. There's going to be little measurements that are off. But because we are going to do the same thing we did on the other side, where you're going to do a final seal, all those gaps will go away when you put in the wheat paste or get it covered up. So especially places like this where it's just hard to get that exact measurement there, those you're just going to cover up with tape, and then we'll fix up with the wheat paste. Need all those areas closed off. I'm going to start by just taping around this, and then we'll show you how to mix the wheat paste next. Okay, so you can always add in more wheat paste, so it's better to err on the side of not enough than too much. And it really does go quite a bit a ways, just a little amount. So I'm going to start by just adding that amount, and then I'm going to use the immersion blender. This can be done by hand. I'm just saving time by using this. So this immersion blender used for cooking, and we're just going to mix it up. Alright, so if we're looking for the right consistency, if you stick your finger in and still feels watery and just runs right off, that means you're going to need more. We want it to be almost like a horse glue, so you want, as soon as you dip your hand in, for it to stick a little layer on there. But if it sticks too much, then you've gone too far. So let's add a little bit more and try that. You can also see a little color change in it too. Alright, so if you look at that, it's completely coated my finger. You can see the white in the fingernail there. So that means it's ready to be used. Okay, now we'll cut to the next scene. Okay, so the next step in this process is adding on the layer of wheat paste using a collage technique. So we're going to be taking paper towel. We're going to be ripping it up into little shreds. So you want them all but to be about this size. Anything bigger doesn't really layer the right way or curve around a lot of the edges. So people trying to cheat the system and go bigger, it doesn't actually usually work out. So it's by far better to have all these ripped up and ready to go, so you don't have to do this multiple times, because your hands are going to get pretty messy as you go. So I'm not going to be doing the whole thing in front of you, I'm just going to be doing a small portion, so you get the idea. So this should be about enough for the area that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to start by mixing up the wheat paste. You can see the color of it and the consistency. It's definitely thicker than water, but not quite thick as glue. And you're going to start by just spreading it onto the surface area. So smooth coat, make sure there's no chunks in it. I also go a little around the edges, as you can see there. And then you're going to start by sticking on the paper and then coating right over it. And then we're going to overlap. Notice how this piece goes over the edge. And keep smoothing it out. I'm going to overlap. And the idea behind this is once we get all of this coated on top of each other, it's going to make a smooth surface for us to paint. It's going to make it look neater. It's going to make it stronger. And it's going to make it a lot easier to paint. So we're trying to get rid of all these tape lines that we've created while we worked. And the idea is the more layers, the stronger it becomes. Usually I do about 3 times over. So this area right here is definitely done. And then I would start working my way down. You also have to think ahead a little bit because it's going to be hard to turn this around. So usually I leave one side that I don't do yet. Or I'll start on all the top, both sides, so it can stand up, and then I'll do all the other sides while that's finished. So you're going to spend some time doing this, making sure that it's all smooth and looks good. It really does make the next step 1,000 times easier if you do this correctly. If you try to rush this step and it's not as smooth as it should be when you go to do the painting, you'll end up spending that time there. So it's just a matter of which time you want to, or which step you want to spend more time on. And this one is the one I would put your time into because it will make the whole project look better and easier in the long run. So you're going to go through the whole part, and then as soon as this dries, I will take you to the next step, which is the painting, the easiest part. Okay, so the next step in the process is just the painting. So we're going to start with the base coat, and then I'm going to flip the camera around and show you the splatter paint. You can do any design you want on this. Acrylics usually work best because they dry quick. And the Chrome Acryl is a nice brand because it's thick enough so you don't have to do tons of layers. You can also use tempera. Probably just take a couple more coats. And when I use this, I just put it right on top of the newspaper so I don't have to dirty a palette. I'm just going to pick up little by little and just start with the base coat. So we're just coating the whole thing in this base color. And then I'm going to start the splatter paint right after. And I'll cut you over to that once this is all painted. Okay, so as you can see for the splatter paint, I've laid my letter down on the ground with tons of newspaper here. And you're also going to start by mixing up your paint with a little bit of water. So this is acrylic paint, just put right in the cup. You're going to be adding water into it, so when you splatter it, it actually sprays. So just in the sink, it doesn't take a lot. So about half and half, so you can see the ratio in there, and then you mix it up. I'm using one of the big brushes. So mix each of your colors up first, get all those ready, and then we're going to bring them over and I'll show you the technique. Okay, so I've got all the colors mixed up. They're now watery, almost the consistency of tempera. And then you're just going to lean over it. Usually wear smock. You want to keep yourself protected and not end up getting this all over the place. So you're going to take the color, right, and then just holding it right over, going to give it little flicks. So you can change the direction of this. Make sure you're getting it into all those sides too. And as you change the direction, it'll change the spray pattern. If you want a longer line, then you go at an angle and a sharp hit. And if you want just dots, you just rain it from above. So let's do some longer lines with the blue. You can see why we put down the newspaper. And I'm also going to make another color by mixing the blue and the white. Give a couple light blue splatters too. Now if this goes on too thick, it can actually peel right off. Look, it's really chunky. So areas that, like that could be a problem potentially. You gotta be careful you don't get too much on there. And of course we'd flip this the other side and do the same thing. So that's the splatter paint. I let it dry. I would do the other side using the same color scheme. Make sure if you get anything on before you get that cleaned up. And that's pretty much the whole process from start to finish. So best of luck. Hope it goes well. Like our video and then subscribe to us below.